Hello everyone, this is Alicia Walton and today we're going to talk about writing good instructions. So in the past I've talked with you a bit about how to write instructions, we've looked over other sets of instructions, and today I'm just going to take you over a few details that you might encounter while you're writing your own instructions and provide some information that could possibly help you along the way. So first, what makes good instructions? If you look over here to the right, you're going to see what a person calls a set of instructions. I say what a person calls a set of instructions because I don't want to identify the individual who created this. But as a set of instructions, this person decided to take a picture of these items and draw lines. And with these lines, we're supposed to figure out how to put this together. You might have a lot of questions. First off, what is this that we're going to be putting together? How are we supposed to put it together? And so I'm giving you a look at this bad instruction picture to give you a few ideas for how to make sure that you don't make some similar mistakes within your own. First off, you want to make sure you have written details and not just arrows. Taking a picture and including it in your instructions is a wonderful thing. A picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Well, it's worth 1,000 very wrong words in this scenario. And while some of you might be able to figure out what's going on here, not all of us can. So having some written details is very helpful. Clearly labeling the parts and pieces of your tools and having that set out as a picture within your instructions and next to those clearly written details can be very helpful. For instance, if I knew what these parts were and what was supposed to go into where, it might make more sense to me. Steps and sub-steps would provide those details. And of course, I mention it a little further down this list, but really a title would be helpful too, right? A title would tell me, or a title should tell me in a set of instructions what the tool is and what the task is that I'm supposed to be completing. And then last but not least, one of the things that makes good instructions good is providing caution and warnings when they're needed. So cautions and warnings. Over here, this is a recipe, and we're told to, and it's listed as ingredients, so the title for this isn't really all that great, but what I liked about this was where the warning was. So cautions and warnings. When do you provide them? You provide the person following your instructions. You make sure that they have your caution or your warning before they get into a potentially harmful situation when following your instructions. So here's an example. Over here, I mentioned that I didn't like the title because it says ingredients, and this isn't really ingredients. This is more steps to follow, right? But let's call this a rough draft though, okay? So we choose a pot with a lid. We add cold tap water, we add salt for flavor, and that's mentioned as optional. That's good. We place the pot over high heat. We're not told exactly how much heat, but that's okay. Again, we'll consider this a rough draft. We're told to notice when a couple of little streams of bubbles are rising, and then we're told to turn down the heat. And then, warning, the pot will be too hot to touch even before the water starts boiling. So this is good. We're told not to touch the pot because it has boiling water in it. Now, some of you might say that we could have possibly gotten a warning about the high heat, right? So you could have maybe mentioned this and the heat up here rather than mentioning this down here. But hey, I'm looking at this as a rough draft, and this is a good start. But whenever you're dealing with something like heat or a stove or any situation in which somebody can be burned or cut or anything like that, you have to give a warning or a caution. This is a good call out because the way that if they're providing it, this person, they've made warning in red, they've outlined it in green, they've put a green check, they've made the text inside this box bold, so it really does draw your attention. Now, as I mentioned before, you may want to put this up above where it mentions the step about placing the pot over the high heat, but at least we get a warning out of this and it's written. So when do you provide it? You provide it before the person following the instructions can or will encounter a potentially harmful situation when following your instructions. How do you provide it? Clearly and by calling attention to them within the text you are providing. So that's how you make sure that you do that. So next, I'd like to review with you what I consider a very good example of instructions for how to use a multimeter to measure voltage. Now, first thing you're going to notice is that, well, first off, Russell Crowe was in my class, right? How awesome is that? You're going to notice that the title is very specific. It's telling me exactly what I'm going to find out about. I don't have to guess. I don't have to read through the instructions to find out what the instructions are for. Frankly, you should never have to do that. I'm given a breakdown of the audience, an introduction. Obviously, you're going to write more than this. Write that. Under the additional information, I have a caution. It's a red triangle with the exclamation point in the middle of it, just like the ones you've seen, I'm sure, in the past. And it warns that if the power supply is set too high, it can damage the circuit. And then, obviously, blah, blah, blah voltage. You're going to give more note than that. But another thing I want to point out here is, as I mentioned earlier, the individual pieces of this are pointed out so that I can understand what they are. I may have never used a multimeter before, but I know these are the probes. I know that's the display, and I know this is the selector knob. And so when I'm looking at the instructions, I can look above at that. And then when I go down to page 2, there it is again. There's the image. I can see where the probes are, the display is, and the selector knob without having to scroll back up to page 1. So that's one of the things that you need to make sure that you have within your paper. You need to make sure that if there's a second and third page to your paper, which most people do have a second page, you want to make sure that you have an image or picture of your tool and that you have the pieces of it identified. That way, again, I'm not going back and forth trying to figure out where the display is while I'm trying to follow your instructions. And then, last but not least, you want to make sure that you have a works cited page for any citations that you use. At the very least, you should have one for the picture that you have, unless you took it yourself. And that's it. Make sure that you learn from some of the other mistakes that I've shown you here, and that you provide instructions that are better than these. Make sure that you provide written details, clearly labeled parts and pieces of your tools, a title that identifies your tool and the function or the task that you are going to be completing with your instructions. Provide cautions and warnings when they're needed. Have steps and sub-steps. And make sure all the written details are clear and easy to follow. As always, if you have any questions, I'm always here to help, and I'm more than happy to hear from you. Take care and happy writing.